Okay, let's call the meeting in order, the Champaign County Board. Thursday, May 20th, 2010. The time is 7:02. Roll call, please.
O'Connor. Here. Richards. Rosales.
Here.
Sapp.
Here.
Schrader.
Yes.
Smucker.
Here.
Wysocki.
Here.
Ammons. Here. Anderson.
Here.
Beckett.
Here.
Benzel.
Here.
Betts.
Here.
Carter.
Here.
Coert. Dennitz.
Here.
Gladney. James.
Here.
Jay.
Here.
Jones.
Here.
Knott.
Here.
Kurtz.
Here.
Langenheim.
Here.
McGinty.
Here.
Michaels.
Here.
Mosier. Nudo.
Here.
Weibel.
Here, we have a quorum. I'm sorry I have no prayer tonight, unless somebody wants to say one spontaneously. Mr. Beckett.
For food, for raiment, for life, for opportunity, for friendship and fellowship, we thank thee, O Lord.
Thank you, Mr. Beckett. Pledge of Allegiance. Okay. All right. I'll do that under announcements. Would the clerk read the notice of the meeting, please?
Notice is hereby given that a regular meeting of the County Board, Champaign County, Illinois, will convene on May 20th, 2010, 7 p.m. in the Lyle Shields Meeting Room, Brookins Administrative Center, 1776 East Washington Street, Urbana, Illinois, in said county for the purpose of allowing and ordering payments of claims against the county, receiving and acting upon reports of committees and such other matters as may be brought before said meeting, which said meeting shall continue in session from day to day until the completion of said business.
Move approval.
Moved by Mr. Betts, second by Ms. Wysocki. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. Seek approval of the agenda and the addenda.
So moved.
Moved by Ms. Wysocki. Second by Mr. Kurtz. I would like to remove items 11B5, 12A, and 12B.
Say those again. You went too fast.
11B5 for you slow folk, 12A and 12B. 11B5 is an addendum. 12A and 12B are not the addendum? No, they're not regular agenda.
Mr. Chair, I hate to ask you again, but I don't know what you're talking about. Say it again. Clearly, distinctly.
11B5, which is on an addendum, pink color. 12A, 12B, which is on the regular agenda, also pink, second page.
Sorry, that was for us dummies in the back.
Maybe you're colorblind tonight. Further discussion on the agenda. All in favor? Aye. All opposed? Motion carries. Date and time of our next regular meetings are Tuesday, June 8th, 2010, 6 p.m., Committee of the Whole for Highway, Transportation, County Facilities, Environment, and Land Use. Tuesday, June 15th, 2010 at 6 p.m. also. Committee of the Whole for Finance, Policy, Personnel and Appointments, Justice, and Social Services. The next regular County Board meeting is Thursday, June 24th, 2010, 7 p.m. in this room. All meetings are in this room. Consent agenda. Does anybody wish to pull items off the consent agenda? Mr. James.
I don't want to pull anything off, but could they turn the volume down? You're awful loud back here.
Actually, we have a complaint by the audience that County Board members are not speaking loudly enough or not speaking close enough to the microphones.
Okay.
So
Okay, thank you.
deal with it, Mr. James. You can always move to front row like I've offered many times.
Put that on the consent agenda.
Mr. Beckett.
I move the consent agenda.
Mr. O'Connor.
You're doing a great job, Captain.
Thank you.
Keep it up.
Is there a second by Ms. Amons? Roll call.
O'Connor.
Yes.
Richards. Rosales.
Here.
Sapp.
Yes.
Schrader.
Yes.
Smucker.
Yes.
Wysocki.
Yes.
Ammons. Anderson.
Yes.
Beckett.
Yes.
Benzel.
Yes.
Betts.
Yes.
Carter.
Yes.
Dennitz.
Yes.
Gladney.
Yes.
James.
Yes.
Jay.
Yes.
Jones.
Yes.
Knott. Kurtz.
Yes.
Langenheim.
Yes.
McGinty.
Yes.
Michaels.
Yes.
Mosher. Nudo. Weibel.
Here. Mr. McGinty, the item on the elected officials, we were going to talk about possibly modifying that. It was on the closed agenda, consent agenda, rather. So, could we have a motion? Is there a motion to reconsider the consent agenda?
I move to reconsider the consent.
Moved by Mr. Beckett. Is there a second?
Second.
Second, Mr. James. All in favor? Aye. All opposed? Aye. Motion carries. Mr. Beckett.
I'd ask to remove the item from the consent agenda regarding the elected officials' wages. I
Which
don't know
number?
item that is. The under finance number. Number 4.
Number 4. That's going to be pulled off consent agenda.
We have to revote it.
We'll have to revote.
Okay, I move the consent agenda with that item removed.
Is there a second?
Second.
By Ms. Wysocki. Roll call.
O'Connor.
No.
Can't vote no.
Consent
Can't vote
agenda.
no. Cannot vote no to the consent agenda. You have to pull an item off then. You have to say what it is.
Yep, Mr. O'Connor, we're going to pull an item off.
It's a rule.
Is that a yes, Mr. O'Connor?
Whatever it takes.
I believe that's a yes.
Richards.
Yes.
Rosales.
Yes.
Sapp. Trader.
Yes.
Smucker. Wysocki.
Yes.
Ammons. Anderson. Beckett.
Yes.
Benzel.
I'd like to ask the parliamentarian for his opinion on this. Mr. Beckett's not the parliamentarian, I don't believe.
Now, what's the question?
The question is why we can't vote no on
I'm sorry? Need your mic?
it. I did.
Well, you got to be closer.
I said the question is why we can't vote no on the consent agenda.
Mr.
It's the rule establishing the consent agenda.
And actually, Mr. Benzel, I have a hard time hearing you. You need to be closer to the mic.
I'm sorry.
Since I'm the author, I'll be glad to explain it. I wrote this.
Go ahead, Mr. Beckett.
All right. The purpose of the consent agenda is to move all non-controversial items together with one vote. Any county board member can remove any item that they object to that is on the consent agenda, thereby leaving the items that are still non-controversial and subject to the unanimous vote. It allows us to have one roll call vote to handle, for example, many financial budget amendments at one time instead of voting them one at a time. So you can remove all the, if that's what you wish to do, you can remove all the items off the consent agenda, and we can go through and vote them individually.
I would like to raise a point of order.
Actually, Ms. Langham, we don't have your, Mr. Benzo, do you wish to vote?
I still would like to have an opinion from
Go
the
ahead, Mr.
parliamentarian.
The consent agenda, as you know, exists, the theory being that everything on there is going to be non-controversial. The vote was whether or not to remove something from the agenda, and I believe that vote has already been completed. So the question now is whether or not the consent agenda should continue as it is. The only way that the consent agenda can be modified is to have something removed. Does that make sense? A little quirky maybe, but do you understand what I'm saying? How about that?
So why do we have a vote?
Because you have to, I can tell you that because you have to have a record of the vote.
I'll vote yes to move this along.
Thank you, Mr. Benzo. Please continue the roll call.
Betts. Yes. Carter. Yes. Cowart. Yes. Dennitz. Gladney.
Yes.
James.
Yes.
Jay.
Yes.
Jones.
Yes.
Knott. Kurtz.
Yes.
Langenheim.
Yes.
McGinty.
Yes.
Michaels.
Why are we voting if you can't vote?
Mosher. Nudo. Yes. Weibel.
Yes, motion carries. For those of you who have questions about this, please consult with Mr. DeThorne afterwards.
Now, I'd like to make my point of order.
Actually, what's your point of order? Speak into the microphone, please.
Why the hell are we voting if we can't
Mr.
vote no?
Actually, I'm really out of order because that's something you can wait till after the meeting. Let's move on to public participation. Mr. Jim Randall. Please step forward.
My name's Jim Randall. I'm with the Seymour Volunteer Fire Department and Fire Corporation. I wanted to speak in regards to the appointment of a new trustee for Scott Fire District. I wrote a letter to, or I sent an email to the chairman and expressing my thoughts and concerns over the issue of the only two individuals that applied for the position. One, we have a gentleman that I've been involved with the fire department either as a fireman or a board member for 34 years. Mr. Maxim, to my knowledge, I wouldn't know him if he's in this room. And in a community the size of Seymour, I think I should know the guy if he's been involved in the community. He has never been to a a Scott Fire District meeting. In the 20 years the Scott Fire District has been in operation, he has never been to a Seymour Fire Corporation meeting, which involves the Seymour Fire Department. In the 40 years that I've been around that community. We have another gentleman, may not be the best man for the job, I can't tell you that, because I've not been in that position to work as a board member with him. But whenever we have a guy that has experience as a fireman, attends both corporation meetings for the fire department meetings, and Scott Fire District meetings, I think the gentleman has a fair idea of what's going on in the operation. Mr. Maxim lives in rural, I don't know where, what his address is, Mahomet, Seymour, Whiteheath, or Sedoris, couldn't tell you. Mr. Jessup lives in Seymour, so therefore I do have a pretty good knowledge of him. If you're going to live in this community, I feel that the Seymour community, which is where about half of the population of the combined area, other than what has been given up to Champaign, about half of that population comes from Seymour, and with a three-man board, we have no representation for a majority of population. We cover not only Scott Township, part of Colfax, we also go into Piatt County of Sangamon Township. So that area where there's a lot of population has no representation, because if this is the case with Mr. Maxim being appointed, all three members are rural people that live away from the direct location of Seymour itself. I couldn't tell you if Seymour even covers Mr. Maxim's property, because I don't know where he lives, other than the fact that he lives in Scott Fire District. So I think that I don't know if the decision has already been made, because I've not even been privy to any of this information until about the last week. But I ask you that's on that appointment committee to consider the knowledge that people have and the businesses that they're in before you appoint somebody to a position. That's all I have.
Thank you. Mr. Eric Thornton.
Good evening, Eric Thorsland, Newcomb Township. I'm here to talk about a couple things. First, some positive notes. One, we had the committee of the whole for a while now. It's an ongoing experiment, perhaps. The only thing I've heard from some people, and it's been done to some extent, is would it be possible for the committees to rotate so that at some point the one last is first once every 3 months? I think it would give time for better discussion. Sometimes as a member of the ZBA, I see the ELOC stuff come up last and maybe get hastened along. because people are tired, want to go home and watch Lost. Secondly, I want to join Mr. Jay in commending the roof maintenance savings fund. I remember sitting in the basement with Mr. Jay and Mr. Sapp 2 years ago at the News Gazette with Mr. Kasich here, and that topic of maintenance and not taking care of it came up. So I agree with Mr. Jay that that's a tremendous idea. Now, moving on to appointments. I had no intention to talk about Mr. Jessup tonight, but I fully agree with the gentleman before me. I pondered that decision myself a little bit. Speaking of decisions and appointments, a little story. You're flying along in an airplane about 5,000 feet, just left Kennedy Airport, wham, you hit a bird. Boom, you hit a second bird. Dead stick, nice big jet airliner, nowhere to land but a river. And one of the best things that can happen to you in a situation like that is someone with a lot of experience at the controls. Jet airliner is a little different maybe than the Board of Review, but for some people it's just as important. We have an opportunity here. If we do things right, and I'm not a lawyer, I don't even pretend to play one on TV, but reading what I have read, I think there's a chance here to take a person with lots of experience and a person who's willing to learn, who I know both personally, and think are good tools for the job. Keep them both, work with the system that you have. It's a smart bunch that we have sitting here in this room. You've made some good decisions. I think you can work a way out to do this, that we don't lose valuable people, either one or all three. They're on the Board of Review now. So I'd love to see that worked out. The task is yours, not mine. That's just my opinion, and I thank you for listening.
Mr. Mark Thompson.
Good evening as well. Missed you a couple weeks ago. I had my timing off by about an hour. I'm here to speak tonight about the land use resources plan. And I think there's things that you people need to discuss amongst you that hasn't been discussed. And some of you, I hope, take notes here tonight and bring this up when others aren't around. Who here has heard of Agenda 21? You and Agenda 21. Anybody? Anybody willing to say they know what Agenda 21 is by the United
Thompson,
Nations?
you cannot interact with the members of the board. It's our rules. They cannot interact with you. You know the rules.
Well, I hope you take the time when you go home to research United Nations Agenda 21. And what you'll find out is it's like a hydra or this ugly monster. It has reach in many, many directions. In fact, again, it started with the United Nations, but its reach now goes down to little governments just like this one. In fact, you find it in zoning departments across this country. In fact, there are 1,100 cities, towns, and counties that are members of the International Council for Local Environmental Initiatives, Local Governments for Sustainability. Agenda 21 is arguably an amalgamation of socialism and extreme environmentalism brushed with anti-American, anti-capitalist overtones. The United Nations recommends avoiding the term Agenda 21 and suggests cleverly named alternatives like smart growth or comprehensive planning. Agenda 21 specifically calls for each community to formulate its own local Agenda 21. Each local authority should enter into a dialogue with its citizens, local organizations, and private enterprises and adopt a local Agenda 21. Through consultation and consensus building, local authorities would learn from citizens and from local civic community business and industrial organizations and acquire the information needed for formulating the best strategies. You may read in your local paper about visioning working groups. In fact, I think you all are very well aware of the Big Small All initiative we had here a couple years ago. It reeks of UN Agenda 21. The people selected to represent citizens in your community will not represent your interests. They'll simply seek partners who share their vision. After all, partners who challenge the stakeholders' ideology would cause gridlock and slow progress. I went to those board meetings, or committee meetings, many of them, and you people really like the Farm Bureau. We all like the Farm Bureau. It's a great organization. But do you know what the Farm Bureau is? The Farm Bureau is an organization of farmers, not landowners. Those 5 or 6 members who are on that committee were not landowners. They don't represent people who own land. I asked them, how many acres do you own? 20. How many do you farm? 1,000. How many do you own? 4. How many do you farm? 2,000. How many do you own? 200. How many do you farm? 2,000. Those farm members are nothing less than a union of farm workers. They are not landowners. So when I stand up here and I scream, you people are stomping all over the property rights of the landowners in this county, you are. It's terrible what's going on. Smart growth is not science. It is a political dogma combined with an insidious dose of social engineering. Smart growth is a wedding wherein zoning code is married with government initiatives to accomplish government's goal of social re-engineering. Smart growth plans usurp property rights and constitutional rights. Most Americans will remain unaware of the implications of smart growth and Agenda 21 until after it is promulgated in their own backyards. These plans are more insidious than eminent domain. Under eminent domain rulings, property owners usually receive compensation for their losses. The threat of lawsuits against local governments, and folks, I am threatening you of a lawsuit if this is passed on the 1/40. I'm telling you that right now. It's insidious what you're doing to the landowners. The threat of lawsuits against local governments over Fifth Amendment takings of private property value through land use regulations has deterred many local governments from adopting stronger land use regulations. The Fifth Amendment to the U.S. Constitution concerning takings reflects the state's interest in land and property and redefines situations in which private property can be infringed upon for the public interest. This board will be addressing this issue in a court of law if these highly restrictive and extremely damaging laws are implemented. I suggest this body have an in-depth discussion, and this is the point. No one's discussed what I'm talking about when it comes to property rights. You guys better talk about it and take it very seriously, because this has huge implications and ramifications if you pass this. And for a final analogy that I'll leave you with, you guys all remember John White from Thomas Paine? You know, the teacher over here who was convicted of sexually molesting little kids? You remember that. You can picture that. Was he a good teacher? Does anybody know, was he a good teacher? Doesn't matter, does it? It doesn't matter one bit how good a teacher he was, because he was molesting children. And I don't care how good most of this land resource management plan is, when it comes to one home per 40 acres, maximum 4 per parcel, let alone 2 per parcel, you are raping the landowners in this county. And by the way, Barb, in this article that came out, when it said, the farming community tells me the land is their pension, if we had prohibited them from doing that, we actually prohibited them from cashing in on their pension, because their only alternative was to sell everything and move to the city or move to Florida or move someplace else. But this will allow them to think more carefully about how they want to parcel out their land due to the ability to do an RRO. That's hogwash. That is hogwash. you ask John, when you talk, when you people discuss this, ask John how many RROs have been allowed in the last 10 years, how many were stopped, and the amount of money those people spend to get one done. This 1 per 40 is insane, and it will be fought. Keep that in mind when you discuss this and you vote on it. Thank you.
Mr. Mark Medlin.
Good evening. My name is Mark Medlin. I'm a resident of the city of Champaign. I'm here tonight to speak about the board review position, which has generated quite a bit of controversy in the past couple of days. I realize that both employees that you're looking at doing, Mr. Williams and Mrs. Sandifer, are both qualified and well able to do their jobs. However, I'm speaking tonight about what I consider to be an issue of fairness in terms of seniority. Where I used to work at, when I started, I knew that I'd have Tuesdays and Wednesdays off on midnights with no chance of ever seeing a holiday off for about the first 10 years that I worked. My vacations were in the middle of April because all the vacation days in June, July, and August were gone. When I finally saw daylight hours, I had 24 years on and still couldn't hold weekends. And in my 26th year of working there, I finally could hold weekends with days off and had no chance of losing them. The same thing holds here. Mrs. Sandifer has been in a position that is tenuous at best, that requires the consent of the Republican Party and the Democratic Party to keep her in her office. At the same time, you're making a motion now to have Mr. Williams, the newcomer, come in and become the permanent member. I believe strongly in people earning their dues and people doing in the position before they're appointed over someone else. I spent 29 years in a union shop, and I can guarantee if somebody had come in and gotten day shift with weekends off, there would have been darn near an insurrection, and there would have been about 55 grievances filed over it. All I'm asking for is when you make your decision tonight, or whenever you make it, that you make it with the understanding that there's a fundamental fairness, that seniority does matter, that seniority, that a person that has written Supreme Court decisions or used by the Supreme Court is someone who we need to recognize that person and recognize that person with a job that does not require her to take the Republican seat every other year. Thank you.
Any further public participation? Seeing none, we'll close that. Moving on to communications. I have one here. At your desk, you have a news release dated May 18, 2010, concerning the site dedication ceremony for the new school in Savoy, which has been an elementary school. County board members are invited to that ceremony, which is taking place at 10 a.m. May 25th, which I believe is a Tuesday. Are there other communications, other than the fact that to remind you to speak into the microphone so members of the audience can hear you as well as the people on TV? Ms. Wysocki.
Yeah, I would just like to bring to the county board's attention a series of public meetings that are underway regarding high-speed rail transportation basically through Champaign County. I was at the second of those meetings this past Wednesday, and I was surprised that it was a full room, that there were a number of municipal public appointed and elected officials there, along with members of the general public. And actually, the presentation was very interesting. This was really the first time I had heard any discussion of it, and the concept is interesting, to say the least. My point is, I think it would really be in the county's best interest to encourage more county board members to sit in on these meetings and have an opportunity to digest the information that's being put forward. It would be helpful to come in on this at the ground level before something develops of any significance. Sort of reminded me of Olympia Drive at the very beginning stages. But anyhow, I would certainly encourage people to look out for these notices and to, if not participate, certainly to attend and listen.
Other communications? Seeing none, we'll seek approval of the minutes, April 22nd, 2010.
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Rosales, second by Mr. James. Discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? All opposed? Motion carries. Standing committee reports, ELUC, Ms. Wysocki.
Yes, I'm moving the approval of a recreation and entertainment license. This is for the Eastern Illinois Abate, Inc. for live bands, music, motorcycle rodeo, and I so move.
Second.
Second by Mr. J. Discussion. See none, all in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries.
And that's all for you.
Finance, Mr. McGinty.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First item, I recommend adoption of resolution number 7370, purchases not following purchasing policy, and I so move.
Second.
Second by Mr. Beckett. Discussion. See none, all in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries.
I recommend adoption of resolution number 7371, payment of claims authorization, and I so move.
Second by Mr. Kurtz. Discussion. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries.
I recommend adoption of ordinance number 862, increasing statutory county clerk fees for Champaign County, Illinois, and I so move.
Second.
Second by Mr. James. Discussion. See none, all in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries.
I recommend adoption of resolution number 7367, amending the fiscal year 2010 budget, and I so move.
Second.
Second by Mr. Mosier. Discussion. Ms. Busey, do you want to talk about this at this time? Why not?
This resolution amends almost every general corporate fund department budget for the remainder of fiscal year 2010, which is half the year. We have known since the end of March that some of our revenues weren't performing as budgeted. Revenues that are of particular note are two of the state-shared revenues, state reimbursement and income tax, and then general government, which is our fees revenue. At the last projection for these revenues, the general corporate fund budget looks to end the fiscal year with a $1.6 million deficit. And we cannot possibly absorb that. So the decision was made in early May to work with the departments to attempt to cut $1 million out of the balance of the general corporate fund budget for fiscal 2010. This resolution, 7367, reflects what was done in working with each of the department heads and elected officials to cut those budgets, and the total net change to the budget is a savings of $983,109.
Mr. McGinty.
Deb, just as a point of clarification, so we need, just so everyone understands, we need really to cut 1.6. We're asking for $1 million now. Could you describe why that discrepancy?
1.6 is what the current projection indicates would be the shortfall. That is a projection. And we are anticipating that the state will not catch up on state reimbursement and income tax, but it is a complete guess at this point. The state makes no commitment as to whether, if we were to receive all of our revenues for income tax that have been posted that are owed to us for this fiscal year, there would be no deficit in income tax. And yet the projection shows almost a $900,000 deficit because of the slowdown in payments. There's also, I guess, the remaining $600,000 is with the hope that those revenues will improve more than what the current projections show, and cutting $1 million out of half a year's budget seemed fairly aggressive, and it's what we did at this point.
Thank you.
Ms. Ammons.
I just wanted to clarify also that
was there, a little louder in the microphone, please.
Was there a percentage that was given to departments to cut, or a dollar amount? Is that how we came to what, I see some departments have more cuts than others.
Yeah, that's pretty much reflective of the department's, the size of the budget of the department in terms of the dollar amount, but it was not a straight percentage. What we did first is identify stationery and printing and conference and training as two areas that should be cut immediately because for any dollars that had not yet been spent, we asked departments who had dollars still allocated there that they cut those, because stationery and printing, we can print our own stationery in-house. We don't have to send it out and have it printed at a print shop. So as much as possible, we cut those line items first. We also cut the capital expenditure for any future reserves for replacement of our technology or equipment that goes to the Capital Asset Replacement Fund. The combination of those three was about $250,000. That left us with about $750 that we still have to cut, which is the equivalent of one payroll for the county. So what was requested of each department is that it find the equivalent of one payroll to cut from its expenses for the balance of the fiscal year.
Mr. Nudo.
Ms. Busey, have you got any recent sales tax updates?
No, the most recent sales tax information was available at the last committee of the whole meeting.
Thank you.
We did receive salary reimbursement, which is another form of state revenue. And I'm sure most of you have already read, but the comptroller sent us a number of payments all at once last week and told us that was it for the year. So we received 80% of what was budgeted, which leaves us with a $60,000 shortfall in salary reimbursement. That's actually better than what I was projecting. I was projecting 60% and $120,000 shortfall there. So I guess you could consider that good news.
Ms. Busey, can you tell me what percentage of this is in salaries or furloughs?
I don't have percentages, but I can tell you the total personnel cuts with this this amendment that you're approving tonight. The total cuts in personnel is $486,854. Of that, the furlough days, which would impact 127 total employees if furlough days are negotiated with the unions, which still has not been accomplished. But if it were, the furlough days are $58,280 of that $486,000 cut in personnel. The balance of that is attributable to, there's been one layoff. There are 11 full-time equivalent positions that are vacant and will not be filled. And then we have had turnover, and with the 3-month waiting period or longer, we've had savings in salary costs because of not filling positions. So that's where that money comes from. There's $129,835 cut in commodities, $196,907 cut in services, and $132,207 cut in capital. That's very different than the amendment that you did in February 2009 when we had to cut the 2009 budget. In that budget, personnel cut was only $391,000, and we actually cut $1.3 million. The cuts in commodities, services were much greater then, and what that demonstrates is our departments no longer have any ability or the same ability to cut from commodities and services that they did a year ago when we amended the fiscal year 09 budget.
Ms. Ammons.
Just ask a follow-up right quick. We did not cut 11 full-time people. We cut, that's counting positions we did not fill.
Those are full-time equivalent positions that are not being filled. For example, the sheriff has 3 deputy positions that have become vacant, and he is not filling them.
Ms. Anderson.
So the furlough days that employees are taking, those are employees that are not under contract. Is that right?
We have, we're working with the unions.
Yeah.
Of the 127 employees who are being asked to take furlough days, 57 are non-union, 22 are AFSCME, and 48 are FOP.
Okay. So when an employee says that it's, we're required to take furlough days, but some departments aren't, is that the choice at the department level, but you're indicating that there may be other employees as this contracts get worked out that will be furloughed as well, perhaps.
I'm not sure I completely understand your question. I don't anticipate more than the 127 employees that I've just indicated will be asked to take furlough days. If the union employees don't agree to the furlough days, then we'll have to go to a different approach for how to cut those dollars. And yes, not all departments are taking furlough days, but many departments are working with much less staff this year than they were last year. And some of the departments who are taking furlough days have the same staffing level that they had last year. Effectively, this is impacting personnel, and as we have to constrict this budget, at this point, it will continue to impact personnel because we've cut just about everything we can from non-personnel costs.
I guess I understand that, but when, I've seen email that an employee says, it's really kind of unfair. We're required to take furlough days, but there are other departments where there are employees that are not taking furlough days.
My response to that would be that we have dealt with all of these cuts at the department level. And I believe the elected officials and department heads have been very diligent and fair about cutting what they can. And some departments, as I just said, have cut much more than others. If you look in the budget document for this year, you'll see that there are departments that cut 14%, 15%, 30%, when 6% was required. But they were bringing their operations under control. Now, if we adopted the approach that you're talking about, that if we're doing furlough days, they should be distributed equally, well then last year when we were cutting the budget, we should have required the same cut from all departments, and we didn't do that because usually that provides a negative impact on the smaller departments if they have to absorb the same level of cut.
And that wasn't me.
There is a difference. As far as I'm aware, most department employees understand what we're going through, and I haven't heard a lot. I know of one complaint, but I haven't heard a lot of complaining about the fact that not everyone is required to do furlough days.
And that was not me saying that.
I understand.
Just wondering,
right.
How we respond.
Yes.
Thank you.
Mr. James.
On the furlough days, I sort of looked at it like when you take the sheriff's department, his staff is such that if you keep cutting, then you have the issue of overtime, and those gentlemen, you need that staff there for the matters they have to attend to, and it's not fair to somewhat compare that to an auditor's office or another office because their jobs don't entail the safety of the public.
Mr. Langenheim. Microphone, please.
A couple of questions. The distribution of these unequal furlough day levies, and was that determined in your office or in the various departmental offices?
It was determined in the various department offices with one exception of an office that did not respond to the request to make cuts.
So the 3%, 3 days in one department is the result of that department's action?
That's correct.
That was not done, so that was where the procedure was carried out?
That's correct. Each department was told how much it was being asked to cut, and each department head came up with the plan for how to accomplish that.
Okay. Now, how did we decide how much each department was going to be required to cut?
We requested that each department cut the equivalent of one payroll from its budget.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Knott.
Deb, you mentioned one department didn't participate. Who was that?
I made the decision about the cuts for the auditor's office.
Because he wouldn't respond, or why?
Because I did not receive a response.
Thank you.
Mr. Jones.
Just quickly, Deb, I'm wondering, hopefully when things get more normalized in the next few years, more back to what you might call normal with the budget, is there a chance that some of these expenses could still be removed, like the stationery and things, maybe telephone expenses? Are those things that you're examining that maybe now that we've done away with some of that, maybe we could still get by with that in the future and keep the budget lower in the future?
We constantly look at what a department actually spent to try and make a determination of what it really needs. And I do think that some of the departments are realizing that stationery that's printed outside of our own resources is a luxury that we no longer need.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Mr. McGinty.
I guess along those same lines, Deb, if Hades does freeze over and the state starts paying more than we anticipated, then we would be recovering some of these cuts as the year goes on, I would assume, if we're able to see that before the end of the year.
I think it would be very difficult to determine that we are in that kind of position before the end of the year. Just for example, we thought we were going to be okay at the end of fiscal year '09, and at the end, the state didn't submit income tax money for the last 2 months, which put us at a $500,000 deficit for the year, and we didn't find that out until January. So when departments have asked me that, I've said, you know, if we underspend the general corporate fund budget this year because we made these cuts and we end up with money ahead for the year, we need it desperately in our fund balance, and then we can use the information we have about this year's revenue to better adjust or build the fiscal year 11 budget.
And this gets us, if I may, Mr. Chair, this gets us just barely through from a general corporate fund balance for this year.
Well, I really hope that the revenues are better than the projections, so that we don't end up with a $600,000 deficit this year.
Thank you.
Further discussion?
Yes.
Being none, all in favor?
No, roll call.
Oh, sorry, we need a roll call vote. Deb did say yes, I thought you said no.
Sorry.
O'Connor.
Yes.
Richards.
Yes.
Rosales.
Yes.
Sapp.
Yes.
Schrader.
Yes.
Smucker.
Yes.
Wysocki.
Yes.
Ammons.
Yes.
Anderson.
Yes.
Beckett.
Yes.
Benzel.
Yes.
Betts.
Yes.
Carter.
Yes.
Cowart.
Yes.
Dennitz.
Yes.
Gladney.
Yes.
James.
Yes.
Jay.
Yes.
Jones.
Yes.
Knott. Kurtz.
Yes.
Langenheim.
Yes.
McGinty.
Yes.
Michaels.
Yes.
Mosier. Nudo.
Yes.
Weibel.
Yes, motion carries.
And finally, from the consent agenda, item number 4, I recommend adoption of resolution number 7364 establishing salaries of elected officials, county clerk, treasurer, sheriff, and county board chair, and I so move.
Second by Mr. Knott. Mr. Beckett.
I move we amend resolution number 7364 to change the cap at the bottom paragraph from 2% to 3%. So in the last line, there are 2 places where 2% would be 3%. And I so move.
Is there a second by Mr. McGinty? Discussion on the amendment. Mr. James.
That's not to exceed, right, Steve, if I take, okay.
Correct.
And I think that our first recommendation, if I recall correctly, was a 5% cap. A 3% for the remaining 2 years, in my mind, is fair if we cap it at 3%, because if it doesn't go up, that's just a cap, but that would only be a 6% raise in theory spread over 4 years, which is about a 1.25% per year, which I think is fair. That's basically the cost of living across that time, and we are setting these salaries for a 4-year spread, so I think that that's something we need to look at and be fair about.
Further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
All opposed?
Aye. Roll call. Roll call.
Yeah, let's go to the roll call. This is for...
You have to divide the assembly now. Point of order. You have to divide the assembly. You already took a vote.
Oh, you're
You
right.
don't get to take a
Okay.
vote.
Show of hands, can I do that? Show of hands. Show of hands for yes. This is for the amendment. Remember? Show of hands, yes.
The amendment to go to 3%, right?
Right. Hold them up high. Passes. Now we're back to the main motion, which has been amended. Further discussion? Any further discussion? Ms. Ammons?
I'll add a comment to this. Of course, I understand that we're set with the responsibility to set salaries for the next 2 and 4 year periods of time for these elected official positions. However, we just cut close to $1 million from the county budget and possibly projected to cut another $600,000 from the budget. Last year, we had to cut 1.3 or 6? 1.3 last year?
That was the mid-year cut. The actual total cut last year was 2.4.
2.4 last year. I don't understand where the projections of the money to even pay these increases will come from in the coming years. Every program I've watched, every fiscal accountant and every channel is saying that the entire economy is on the decline, not the increase. And so if we're cutting jobs, we're increasing health care, we're removing all possibility from our budgets, and then we say, well, we'll project to pay an increase to elected officials in the next 3 and 4, not the 1 and 2, but 3 and 4. I think that's very, well, it's certainly courageous, I would say at best. So I won't vote for it, but I thought I would make my comment publicly.
Mr. James.
Those same thoughts went through my head at one time, Carol, but we're not saying we're giving them 3%. We're capping it at 3%. If the CPI stays at 0 or 1%, that's what they'll be getting. It's just that it can't exceed 3. The problem I had is when you look at some of the other things that we're talking about, negotiations will always take place and ongoing, and those folks have the right to come in and possibly get a raise, where if we lock these in at 0 for 4 years, I think we're doing a disservice to those that are running for office that are trying to get in. And again, I'm saying they may end up with nothing, but they cannot exceed the 3%.
Mr. McGinty.
And once again, I'd like to put Ms. Busey on the spot to help to explain some of the reasoning behind this, because keep in mind, this is over 4 years, and we're making adjustments. We've already made adjustments to just this year's budget. We're about to go through next year's budget separately from that. In the upcoming months, we go through each year separately, but we have to do this for 4 years. Deb, could you explain just a little bit about how we, came to this number from a form of, reasonableness, looking at year 3 and 4 for these particular elected officials, please?
Well, we have tried to maintain some salary administration for the elected official positions and some equity among those positions, and it's been determined that the county clerk, treasurer, and circuit clerk positions are of similar size and should be compensated accordingly, and the auditor, coroner, and recorder positions are slightly smaller in terms of responsibility, accountability, and the type of job that it is within county government. And we set the circuit clerk, auditor, coroner, and recorder's salaries 2 years ago actually almost 3 years ago, before we knew what the economic situation was going to be. And the problem with freezing entirely is that we will lose the internal equity or fairness among what these positions are paid. I mean, that's just one component of what a concern would be. So at least with a 3% cap in years 13 and 14, you can anticipate that if you freeze the wages of the second group, circuit clerk, auditor, coroner, and recorder, for the first 3 years of their next term, by the 4th year of their next term, we might be back to the point of equity that we were at this year. So.
Thank you.
Further discussion. Mr. Carter.
I just have a question.
Yeah, there you go.
I'm looking at elected officials. Why you not including them all?
We're only setting the salaries for the elected officials who will be elected in November of 2010. The other elected officials' salaries were set 6 months before they were elected in 2008. You can't do them all together.
We can do it every 2 years within a certain time period.
We didn't do any before. We killed them.
It depends which time period you talk about, I think. We did kill some, others we did not.
Well, I have the problem if you saying elected officials, it should be all of them, not part of them. If you can't do all of them, you shouldn't do any of
They're
them.
not all elected at the same time, though, that's the problem. Because they're elected different times, we cannot set salaries for
They're still
different times.
elected officials.
Oh, I agree, totally.
You
I
can't
agree.
deny that, they elected officials.
They are elected.
Well, then we shouldn't do any.
Further discussion. Let's go with the roll call vote. Any objection to that? Very good. Roll call.
O'Connor.
Yes.
Richards.
No.
Rosales.
Yes.
Sapp.
No.
Schrader.
Yes.
Smucker.
Yes.
Wysocki.
Yes.
Ammons.
No.
Anderson. Beckett.
Yes.
Benzel.
No.
Betts.
Yes.
Carter.
No.
Cowart.
No.
Dennitz. Gladney.
No.
James.
Yes.
Jay.
No.
Jones.
No.
Knott.
No.
Kurtz.
Yes.
Langenheim. McGinty.
Yes.
Michaels.
No.
Mosher.
No.
Nudo. Weibel.
Yes, I believe it failed. Is that correct? It failed. Pardon?
Mr. Chairman,
Yeah.
may I move the original motion then that was from the committee?
We have to motion to reconsider.
Consider for the original motion.
Second.
Now, we need Mr. Schrader, did you vote no for the last vote?
No, I didn't, so I can't, I'm sorry.
Mr. Knott?
I'll motion to reconsider.
Is there a second? Second to be by anybody, by Mr. Sapp. All in favor? Aye. All opposed? Motion carries. We're now back to the main motion.
Can I explain?
Go ahead, Mr. McGinty.
Back to the main motion, which is
The
2%.
main motion without the amendment. This is the original motion we started out with. What?
The reconsideration.
Oh, I'm sorry, you're right. We have to have an amendment to remove that.
I will move to amend to 2%, to 2%.
Second.
Second, Mr. Thank you. Discussion. All in favor? Aye. All opposed? Motion carries. I'm sorry, Ms. Wysocki. I pulled the gun on you earlier. You want to comment on the main motion?
I guess I would like to hear somebody tell me what they see as the advantage of doing that,
Then
going back to the 2%.
I assume we're saving a little bit of money.
Over the 4-year term, you will save $8,200.
At much.
Okay. Further discussion, Ms. Ammons.
I would like to just say that the minimization of this savings is quite interesting when we would cut salaries from everyday working people and have no comment. So the salaries that our elected officials have is certainly not hard to live on, and it won't deter people from running for those offices in the future. So we really have done the right thing by staying with the original motion that I believe Mr. Brad Jones put before the board at the committee level.
Okay, I might add we have to set the salaries by the end of the month because there's a deadline. Mr. Beckett?
Well, I've only been on the board going on 10 years, and I know the struggle that we went through to try to get all of these salaries, because we set them at different times, and taking into account what the elected officials actually do into some sort of synchronization so they made sense. And now we're going to adopt it for some political reason because 2% sounds better than 3%. That's fine. I'll vote for it. But it just shows this place is a train wreck.
Thank you, Mr. Beckett. Ms. Wysocki?
Ms. Busey, could you comment on what 2%, well, 2% or even 3% for that matter, does in terms of keeping these salaries on track, competitive with other counties, and our ability to support these salaries?
Point of order. The vote has already been taken. Why are we debating this after the vote?
Exactly.
Pardon?
Call the question.
No. Oh, wait, hold on. Clear.
There's a motion on the floor.
Motion is on the floor.
It's for 2%.
The motion is on the floor. It's a different motion. We have not voted on it yet.
No, we turned down 3%.
That's right. The motion on the floor is for 2%, correct.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Ms. Wysocki.
And that's what I'm
I
asking.
apologize.
And that's what I'm asking about. The dollar amount may not be that much, but I've heard you say, and correct me if I'm wrong, that we continue to do this and we get further behind in establishing salaries that are reasonable, equitable for elected officials. And at some point, there's going to be a day of reckoning because we're going to have to play serious catch-up, right, to compensate these folks.
Based on your history, I think that's correct. In previous, going back almost 30 years, when these wages are frozen for 4-year terms, typically what happens in the next term or the term after that, you've seen many of these salaries increase by as much as 30% in 1 year because they were so far below the market, and in fact even below what standards we have for other positions within the county in terms of what employees are paid. We are already at the low end of our comparables for elected officials. We already are generally third or fourth out of the comparable counties that we compare with, and there are 4 others. So, and that is not true of our regular employees, but it's true of our elected officials. The difference between 2% and 3% is that in the third and fourth years, if the CPI were 3% and these elected officials receive 3%, they would get closer to equity with the circuit clerk, who is going to be being paid more, again, even if her wage is frozen for the first 3 years of the next term. And they would be earning more than the auditor, coroner, and recorder not until the 4th year of this term. If the 2% is adopted, they would begin to earn more in the 3rd year if the 3% is adopted, if in fact the CPI is that high. We just recently learned that the CPI is a number that the board can use to define future salary increases, and I found that encouraging. And if we can reach a point, hopefully sometime in the next 2 terms of doing this, if the CPI is applied, then all of the elected officials would be receiving the same increase every year, which would maintain the equity into the future. And the other benefit is that CPI is the factor that we use in calculating the property tax. So we know that we have a revenue stream that's going to increase by that percentage with which we can pay salary increases. So that's basically the thinking that goes into this.
Mr. Langenheim.
We've just cut the salaries of a lot of our staff. These people are not hurting. I don't think I can vote to increase their salaries with a clear conscience under the conditions we face.
Mr. James.
I guess I just keep hearing everybody saying that we're cutting salaries, which in essence we did, and we're not really increasing anybody's if it's based on the CPI unless that does go up, and it is capped. And I know that, we all get emotional because we hear all this stuff, but 2 days or a week from now, we're going to sit back and say, geez, what did we just do? Like Mr. Beckett said, we're heading for a train wreck possibly. I know they make good money. I sit back sometimes and I think, geez, I wish I had that job. But then again, as I tell everybody, be careful what you wish for, because when you're in it, you're going to say, I'm not paid near enough. I think we really need to look at it and be fair. We're telling these folks 0 at best. And if the CPI does go up, if it does, which none of us know, none of us have a crystal ball other than Mr. Beckett, if it does go up, then they'll get a raise, but only up to 3%. And like I said, when you factor that over 4 years, and I think as a whole, most everybody does a good job. There's always a few that don't, but that's neither here nor there. But I think we need to look at it and be somewhat fair for these folks.
Mr. Smucker.
Call the question.
There's a second. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries.
Roll call.
Second was on Mr. Benzel. And let's go to the roll call, please.
Point of clarification.
Yes, sir.
We are on a 2%.
This is 2%.
That was on
This is back to the, that's
And
correct.
after 20 minutes of mindless gum banging, we're going back to the consent.
Keep your teeth in, please. Roll call.
O'Connor.
Yes.
Richards.
Yes.
Rosales.
Yes.
Sapp. Schrader.
Yes.
Smucker.
Yes.
Wysocki.
Yes.
Ammons.
Yes.
Anderson.
Yes.
Beckett.
Yes.
Bensel.
Yes.
Betts.
No.
Carter.
No.
Cowart. Dennett.
Yes.
Gladney.
Yes.
James.
Holding my nose, yes.
Jay.
Yes.
Jones.
Yes.
Knott.
Yes.
Kurtz.
Yes.
Langenheim.
No.
McGinty.
Yes.
Michaels. Mosher.
Yes.
Nudo.
Yes.
Weibel.
Yes, motion carries.
That's all from finance. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. McGinty. Moving on to policy personnel appointments, we have 2 items, but before Mr. Betts starts, I'd like to say something about resolution number 7353. At the meeting of the committee as a whole for policy personnel appointments, so my recommendation is not to a 12-12 vote tie, therefore was advanced to this board without recommendation. It appears, it's clear that some county board members do not support my selection. I will add that I'm the only person that interviewed all the candidates. I believe that many of you did the same thing. Those interviews lasted from about 45 minutes to 1 hour each. It consisted of about 35 questions. In addition, it's clear that some of you do not have faith in my ability to select the right candidate for a position. If you look at my track record, I've heard compliments from Democrats and Republicans about my selections. For some reason, which I do not fully comprehend, some of you are not happy with this selection, even though at an earlier committee as a whole, an earlier board meeting, he was approved by this county board with only a few negative votes. Therefore, I have decided to apply a business-style model to this position. I hereby withdraw the nomination of Wayne Williams to be on the Champaign County Board of Review. Since he's already in the Board of Review, I will give him a 6-month probationary period to test his muster, as is done in the real world. At that time, I will bring back a nomination to this board. Mr. Betts.
I move adoption of resolution number 7360, approving the county movie tour book agreement with CGI Communications, Inc.
Is there a second? By Ms. Amos. Discussion. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed?
Aye.
Show of hands, please. Raise your hands if you approve. Raise your hands, please. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. We have a majority. The motion is approved. Mr. Betts, do you have further business?
No further business.
Is there any new business? Mr. Nudo?
I just wonder why the chair didn't allow discussion with your decision.
Because there's no item on the floor.
Move adjournment.
We're adjourned.
That's classic.
That's classic. You know,
We're adjourned.
wonders why we're such a joke. You just confirmed it.
I mean,